Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last College of Education's research conversation for the 2021-2022 academic year. Today, it's such a privilege to have the Dean of the College of Education, Dean Mike Trevisan, leading the research conversation. His presentation is titled, you can all see it there, The Importance of Policy Research and Evaluation for International School-Based Counseling. Dr. Mike Trevisan has served as Dean of the WSU College of Education since 2013. His research focuses on the use of program evaluation to better our schools and communities. Much of this work is focused on building the professional capacity of school personnel to carry out evaluation work. Dean Trevisan has provided workshops and seminars on various evaluation topics to graduate students and faculty throughout the world. He's a founding member and chair-elect of ISPRESC, an international coalition of faculty, deans, policymakers, and practitioners promoting school-based counseling as a policy mechanism and essential professional role to support K-12 students and teachers around the world. Aside from being a seasoned administrator, Dean Trevisan is also a great scholar. He has been able to be very active in his scholarship. In fact, within the last 2 years, when I checked up his Dean web page or faculty profile today, he has authored or published 2 books and 1 book chapter just over the last 2 years. Thank you for your leadership, not just only in administration, but also as well as in scholarship. Please join me in welcoming Dean Trevisan to our research presentation today. Over to you, Dean Trevisan. So you can go present for about 30 minutes or so, or 40, and then we can have the rest of the time for conversations.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Shola. Can everybody hear me all right? Yeah,
Yes.
Thumbs up there. Thank you, Kathleen. All right, it's really a treat for me to be here, and this is kind of my out of routine kinds of thing to do, so I appreciate the opportunity to do it, and I'm very pleasantly surprised that anybody's here at all, so thank you everybody for showing up. I have been doing program evaluation in the context of school counseling for many years, off and on, and I've done some policy research as well. And all of this has kind of evolved. About 20 years ago, I was working as a director of an evaluation center here at WSU, and we had a large contract with the Yakima School District. So this covered me for 3 years, and the idea then was to build an evaluation system for the school counseling program. And I teamed up with the lead school counselor there. He was really the heart and soul behind all of school counseling there. He's now long retired, but he also had a PhD, so I like to write over the summer, and he and I published an article together. And I published a couple of papers out of that as well, one dealing with program evaluation in particular, and then one was more of a policy research oriented paper. And then, you know, as things happened, my career moved on, and I was focused on trying to get promoted to full professor, and, you know, of course, Peer 1 journal articles account, and so I kind of left it behind in some ways, but I was contacted in 2013 by some people who are now really good colleagues, and a couple of them are now our friends as well, who have been focused on program evaluation in the context of school counseling, as well as policy research to try to advocate for school counseling. And so we made a connection there, and come to find out that more than the 3 or 4 people in my field actually read and used the journal articles that I had written 20 years ago. So that was gratifying. And what it did was it opened up a whole world for me that I wasn't in touch with before, a research world as well as a kind of a technical assistance world. I'm not a counselor. I don't affiliate with counseling. I know some counselors, school counselors. I have a lot of respect for them. And this is my entree into the field. I mean, my PhD is in educational psychology. I focused on measurement. I still do it in an applied way, but for many, many years, I've simply focused on program evaluation. So let me show you what I'd like to do here. I think this could be an auspicious time for school-based counselors. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And if you've been in schools for any length of time, you know that school-based counselors, school counselors are probably on the outside looking in the majority of the time. Okay. There's a significant role for program evaluation and policy research in the context of school counseling. A new school-based evaluation framework now exists. And last, there's a number of international initiatives working to promote school-based counseling. So this is, I'm just going to kind of dabble here in the work that I've been doing with other colleagues. And it's international. We work with lots of developing countries and developed countries. It's both program evaluation and policy research. And it has simply been life-giving for me. When I was on leave, or not on leave, I had I don't know what you'd call it, the 2 months I spent in Italy, that was at the University of Verona, and that's kind of been the home of all of this work at for international school-based counseling. And so it was great to see people again and be able to affiliate with them. If you recall, back in 2018, I had a Fulbright Specialist Award for 6 weeks and I had 2 3-week trips to Korea. And that Fulbright Award was also focused on this school-based counseling, evaluation, and the like. And my collaborator there and I developed a model for school-based counseling evaluation work in Korea. And we had that published in the preeminent policy education policy journal in South Korea. One thing I also want to mention here, I kind of go back and forth between the US as being kind of a frame to compare everything else to or inform everything else for around the world. And sometimes I'll focus on the international scene. So here's what I'd like to start with. Pre-pandemic, there are over 90 countries seriously considering implementing school-based counseling. And I'm purposely using the phrase school-based because it's more of a overarching term. When we talk about school counseling, I think in the US, we immediately go to our experience and our understanding of school counseling. For most of the world, it looks nothing like that, absolutely nothing. And so thus we call it school-based counseling. Most countries are just starting to see this as an important thing to do. And we had a lot of momentum before the pandemic, and then the pandemic hit. And I know that a lot of your own initiatives have been stymied as well, and ours clearly has, but we're trying to resurrect some of these things. But this was just before the pandemic. Let me give you an idea of what it could look like in some places. In Bangalore, India, and I'll talk about Bangalore, India a little bit more later, but in Bangalore, India, they don't yet have school-based counselors like we would know school counselors. What they have is somebody who may or may not have training. They don't have an office. They could easily be sitting in a stairwell with a student off to the side while class is in session to provide some kind of counseling or support for that student. And that's not an uncommon thing. Okay, so that's why we're calling this school-based counseling. And you can see from just that snippet right there, there's this really strong need for this kind of work. I'd also like to mention that school counselors in the US have historically struggled to gain a foothold in schools. And if you were worked in K-12 schools, you know this to be true in the US. And there's a variety of reasons for that. I'll go into them here. There's a long literature in the school counseling literature in the United States about this. It's also gone into other countries. I mean, you can find these kinds of things in India, in the Indian literature, educational literature, as well as in Korea, Japan, and the like. So this is, it's kind of an interesting phenomena for me. So I've been reading about this for many, many years. One of the reasons is role ambiguity. School counselors often do things that aren't counseling oriented. And this is in part fostered by the school principal who deploys a school counselor and is responsible for overseeing school counselors. And school principals are well-meaning. I'm not being critical here. They're trying to make sense of scarce resources, and there are important tasks to be done, and so they assign the school counselor to it. But when they do that, they can't do counseling. There's a lack of resources. When I had my, I'll talk about the ratio of school counselors to students. There's simply not enough of them. So a school counselor is overburdened with the number of students they can't get to. And in addition, when I was doing this work in the Yakima School District here in the middle of the state, at the tail end of this, the school district lost a levy. And that was the first time they ever lost that levy that provides supplemental funding for the school district. It was a $13 million shortfall, and this is 20 years ago. So that number is bigger today given inflation. And the first thing they did was they laid off all of the elementary school counselors. And that's not an uncommon thing in the United States. And then, of course, there's a lack of understanding and acceptance regarding the importance of mental health support for children. I mean, think about it. In the US, we have some people who are just, pull yourself up by the bootstraps kind of thing. Why should we support mental health? I think we got a better understanding today, and I'm going to get to that in just a moment. But nevertheless, these are the things that have dogged school counseling in the US. We have a journal in the organization that Shola mentioned that I'm a part of. And the title of this journal article here, Who Took Counseling Out of the Role of Professional School Counselors in the US? This was published in 2019. It was so popular among the readership, it was voted the top journal article of the year. And it kind of said it all, but it also said other things. And I'll mention those at the tail end of the presentation. I'm thinking this time could be different. We've been in the midst of a pandemic now for 2.5 years. The negative impact on everybody, but particularly children. Any parent, any school teacher, anybody involved with kids at all would know that the impact has been negative and significant. And so there's discussions about the importance of mental health in a way that I'd never heard before. And so here's the evidence and the argument, at least to begin. There have been the last 2 years numerous national and international studies that have focused on the impact, the negative impact of the pandemic on children from around the world. They use databases or surveys. They compare 2019 as the pre-pandemic baseline They compare that to the rates in 2020 or 2021. And all of the studies come up with the following, among other things. Depression is at an all-time high for children. Anxiety, suicide. Before the pandemic hit, suicide is the #1 killer of teenagers in Korea. So as an outlier, Korea is actually another country besides the United States that has a full-fledged school-based counseling program that they're wanting to expand. And trauma. Okay, there was an article published in the Lancet here about 6 weeks ago, and the article documented, and this was a follow-on article, I hadn't seen it before, but there was a group out of Oxford University that had been able to document a conservative estimate of the number of children who lost a parent or caregiver due to the COVID. And it's over 5 million throughout the world. And so you can see that trauma is a big deal in all of this. Now, another thing that, another part of the evidence for me is the US Surgeon General's office. And again, this is a political appointee, but the US Surgeon General has a bully pulpit. You know, he has a platform to make an argument, and they're focused on ways to support youth mental health. And they made the observation that there's simply insufficient numbers of school counselors nationally, making it difficult to adequately address the mental health needs of K-12 students. Now, I have to tell you, I've been following these things, education reform articles that come out of, say, the Department of Education, the World Bank, OECD, and school counselors are never mentioned, never. And I've looked at these things for the last 15 years. So to see the US Surgeon General's office come out with something like this was heartening. Now, they also talked about some of the policy to configure school counselors. They're saying the school counselor to student ratio should be 1 to 250. And this is a recommendation from the American School Counselor Association. The average number in the United States is 1 school counselor to 424 kids. So not only is it a whole lot higher than what's recommended, school counselors are doing things other than they are educated and trained to do. So they can't get to even the 250 students. Here's another one that drives this point even home. And this came out just a few months after this comes out of the Department of Education. And here's a summary of the recommendation. They recommend a significant expansion of the number of school counselors across the US. They also recommend the removal of administrative tasks from the school counselor workload. Now, to me, I think for 30 to 35 years, you can go back in the literature and there's passionate pleas by authors to do this very thing. And I don't know, it's taken a pandemic and the negative impacts of a pandemic for the Department of Education to come out with a statement like this. They also said maintain counselors to counselor to student ratios of 1 to 250. So you've got the basis, you've got some evidence and an argument that's being put forth. And thus, I think there's a real opening here for this kind of work, not only in the United States for an expansion of it and a rejiggering of it so that it's better deployed, but as the US goes, so does the rest of the world in lots of ways. And so if we can get this right in the US, it will inform what other countries might do. So that's the background. So why program evaluation? Well, there's two basic reasons to do program evaluation. there's lots of nuances to this, but one is to improve programs and services. And we call that formative evaluation. And the other is for program effectiveness and accountability. We call that summative evaluation. My colleague and friend, Jay Carey, he and I published the first book on program evaluation in school counseling. And this book was put together by, it was informed by the evaluation field through me, okay? And the school counseling field through Jay, and the overlap that we might have. But he and I have teamed up to do a number of workshops to practitioners around the world, and we would get feedback from people. So all of that came into being, and we put together this book. I'd like to say it's selling like hotcakes, but it's not. But there are some people who are buying it, and it's informing what's going on in the not only the education and training of school counselors, but also school counseling practitioners. There is an evaluation framework embedded in here, and I took the discussion of the framework out. It kind of gets into the weeds, but suffice it to say, what I always recommend with people is with program evaluation, we tend to be rather parochial about what we mean by program evaluation. You know, administrator would think of program evaluation as one thing, school counselor, another thing, the community, maybe something else. And so it's important to understand where people are coming from. And as a discipline, it's still emerging. So there's still this competition of ideas and the like, but I find it very invigorating to navigate this field. There are some benefits of the evaluation framework, and I'm going to discuss them here. And this is kind of as a means to help define program evaluation, particularly in the context of school-based counseling. One is we wrote the book in a way that it meets the professional standards of program evaluation. This is the first connection that we know of between the discussion in the school counseling literature about the importance of program evaluation, which also dates back 35 years, but connected now to school counseling. The second benefit is that this incorporates the use of qualitative methods. The American School Counseling Association has an evaluation expectation if programs are going to be approved by ASCA, the acronym for the association. And it's all numerical. It's all focused on trying to generate impact. But we see an important place for qualitative methods, particularly trying to drill down and get at people's perceptions and the like about the program. A third benefit is we include formative evaluation as a valued purpose. As I mentioned, the ASCA model is heavily focused on impact and accountability. And so we bring to fore formative evaluation. Here's a major difference between research on the one hand and evaluation on the other. You know, I think many of you, if you haven't dealt with program evaluation, you probably read or even thought that program evaluation is applied research. We don't think it's applied research in the evaluation field. And one of the things, one of the major differences is embracing stakeholders. Research, there's really no obligation to bring stakeholders into the mix. There's certainly exceptions to that. But as an enterprise, it's not obliged to do it. But that's not true for program evaluation. And we help school-based counselors think broadly about stakeholders. And a fifth benefit here is our framework fosters the impetus and process for culturally responsive evaluation. And if we, there are many countries, say particularly in Europe right now, where immigrants are coming into the country and they are a minority group. And the majority group is trying to be well-meaning and support them. What we are arguing is that the evaluation also needs to be responsive to the way they might think about information, the fact that they might want to have a voice somehow in the development of the evaluation. There's a literature that goes back 30 years about culturally responsive evaluation. And a lot of it, the base is actually borrowed from counseling. So there's kind of an interesting connection between counseling and program evaluation. Jay and I have a book chapter in ISPRESC that also brings in how this framework can be used to address racial disparities within a particular school district with regard to school-based counseling. So we're about as up to date as we can get here. Now, for school counselors, so to be clear here, I'm talking about not a third-party evaluator. What I'm talking about is as school counselors evaluating their own programs. Okay, that's the spirit of this. And to do that, however, this creates some burdens, and it's important to mention them here. One is school counselors have very little time to focus on program evaluation. They're off doing a whole host of things. They got too many students to deal with. They're doing administrative tasks. They lack time. So even the consideration of doing program evaluation by school counselors, at least in the US, could be thought of as overwhelming, if not ridiculous. Okay. There's also a lack of training. You won't find evaluation coursework in the context of school-based counseling or school counseling master's programs. But what's interesting, though, is there is a little bit of a literature on practicing school-based counselors being interested in doing program evaluation and seeing the need for it. And they are interested in having professional development experiences. There are not, for the most part, unique professional development experiences for school counselors in the United States. So I see this as an opening. There is yet another opening here. Here's some pillars of this framework. One is there's a top scholar in the evaluation field by the name of Carol Weiss, and she's now passed away, but she made the point that the people who will use evaluation the most are the ones of a program, are the ones who provide the program services. And that's kind of then the spirit of having school counselors evaluating their own program. And that statement is so provocative and has sustained over time that anybody advocating for large scale evaluation, they've probably got a caricature of Carol Weiss on their shoulder as they're making this statement, because they know they have to in some way respond to her. The second comes from me and Jay. We made the observation that, well, or recently, I'd say in the evaluation literature, there's a lot of people saying, you know, evaluation is just not a technical endeavor. You just don't have to be a methodologist. In fact, that could get in the way. You have to deal with lots of people. So having good non-technical skills is really important. So we made the argument that school counselors, given their natural predilection, their education and training, is probably in a really good position to do effective program evaluation. And the last comes from, remember I mentioned this, who took counseling out of school counseling in the US, at the Lambie article. They'd mentioned there that, they'd mentioned in the article that by doing program evaluation, school counselors are in a position then to advocate for their job tasks, doing program evaluation over and over, and reporting out on this about counseling services, the interventions that they do, all these kinds of things, is a way of advocating for the role and place of school counselors. So last, let me mention the policy research, a part of my work. In 2017, there was the International Handbook of Policy Research and School-Based Counseling. I have the chapter in there as well, but this kind of set the stage then to ratchet up our work around the world to focus on the use of policy research to advocate for school counseling. Knowing that there are 90 countries who are interested in this, policy research could be an important tool to help motivate legislation and earmarking resources for school-based counselors. In addition, just a few short years back, the International Society of Policy Research and Evaluation for School-Based Counseling, otherwise known as ISPRESC, I know that's a crummy acronym, but couldn't do any better than that, this is an international organization. Here's their webpage. So you can just Google ISPRESC and you can see the work that's being done. There are approximately 250 members internationally now, worldwide. They're made up of school counseling faculty, school counselors. I think I'm the only non-school counseling faculty, although I am a dean. There are other deans. There are policy researchers who are interested in school counseling. And there are also policy advocates. Here's our leadership. So I just put this up here to give you a sense. Currently, the chair of the Executive Council is Nigerian, Oyaziwo Alawede, and he has become a good colleague of mine. You can see I'm the chair-elect. There's an individual from Malta, a person from India. Then you can see on the right-hand side the regional leaders, and they're from all over the world as well. Here's a sampling of the projects. One, I mentioned the development of evaluation model for school counselors and the federal government in Korea, and that's what Sang-Min Lee, my collaborator at Korea University, and I did when I had my Fulbright specialist program. And Sang-Min is a member of ISPRESC and one of the regional leaders. We also have a project that we had some momentum, and then the pandemic hit. We have a journal article out from a needs assessment that we did. And this is trauma-informed education for school counselors in Nigeria. And what we're trying to do there, the reason for the trauma is terrorism is a big deal in Nigeria, and in the north and in the northeast, Boko Haram operates. And it's really, if people are traumatized, it's pretty tough to learn anything, right? It's pretty tough to teach anything. So it's an eye opener for us. What we're hoping to do is provide some professional development in other places and have people come in to a particular venue like Abuja, which is the capital of Nigeria, or maybe even Lagos, the economic seat. And our own Shola Adesope is working with me on this project. And I very much appreciate Sola's investment in this work here. And and maybe we can get this thing off the ground if we can move past the pandemic, at least most of it. And a next piece that we have is the development of policy briefs. And that work is being housed within the context of India, particularly Bangalore, India. And I've been a visiting scholar a couple of times at a place called Christ University in Bangalore, India. And the College of Education and the schools of social science and education at Christ University. We have an MOU. It's a WSU Christ University MOU. And so we've done a few things by Zoom. The educational psychology faculty and some others as well helped with the use of technology to teach and the like. So we had some Zoom meetings. We would be in the morning and they would be 8:30 in the evening and past, and later than that in India. And they seem to be used to that kind of arrangement. But that's the work that's ongoing right there. So this is just a sampling, but these are the things I'm involved with. And last, I'd just like to say, with school-based counselors conducting effective program evaluation, strategic policy research, school-based counselors could be poised to gain that elusive foothold in schools as an essential professional. And I'll end it there. And I'm fine sharing these slides if you wanted. I have the references as well. So I'll stop sharing the screen. And I am wide open to any kind of comments, questions. I appreciate you hanging in there with me.
Thank you, Mike. I've been asked to moderate the discussion, and so I'll just very lightly moderate it, of course. People can put their hands up emojis or put something into the chat if they'd like. I'll try to keep an eye on that. Mike, I had a question. You know, when I think about counseling in elementary school, I think of the old, or even in high school, I think of the old model from my days of the guidance counselor. And it was really just about, you know, what are you going to do to go to college, or what are you going to do after you leave high school and go out into the work world? Can you give me a little sort of very quick thumbnail history of how it's changed to encompass these much more valuable things, I think, of the trauma related and the other kinds of psychological benefits that you talked about?
Right. Okay. No, that's a great point, AG. And again, this isn't my field. What I've picked up is picked up from my colleagues and the writing of joint papers and chapters and the like. But school counseling went through several iterations over probably 100 years. Back in the 20s, there was a huge influx of immigrants from Europe, and they often didn't come speaking English. And school counseling was born at that time to try to find a way to help them into the school system. And so it sounds familiar to even today from immigrants from other countries. If you fast forward to 1957, which it is the year that Sputnik went up, and then we were in the space race, and then the Cold War with the Soviet Union. There was a huge influx of dollars from the federal government to schools to hire school counselors, and the idea there was to identify talent. I mean, this is it, to identify talent among the student population to pursue STEM fields that would eventually feed into things that would help us with military defense and the space race. From that time, however, as you know, the Cold War had dissipated. I'm hoping it's still dissipated. I don't know today, but as it had dissipated and the Soviet Union fell apart and the like, there was work by many school counselors, school counseling faculty and scholars to put together what is referred to as a comprehensive developmental school counseling model, and that's what's embraced by the American School Counseling Association. And there are various components to that model, and it was all part of this trying to help school counselors better define themselves and be able to show what they can do in schools. And evaluation is an important part of that, evaluation done by school counselors. It's on, it's like its third iteration, but it's, so today they'd refer to it as the Ask a National Model. But counseling is an important piece there. And counseling has a kind of a reactive component, you know, crises happen and they have to respond to the crises. There's also a prevention component. So for example, if bullying is an issue, perhaps it's a school counselor who's providing some kind of education for students with an anti-bullying kind of curriculum. There also might be group counseling kinds of things that the school counselor does. And this isn't widespread, but you can find this all over the United States. And I completely agree with you, AG. We're kind of the same era. And this was not our exposure, at least that what I can remember. It was all about, you know, preparing for college and what are you going to be when you grow up and, you know, this kind of thing. So that's kind of a nutshell.
Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Other questions, folks? Please.
Well, I do have one, if nobody has any question. Thank you so very much, Dean Trevisan. Really interesting presentation. You talked about the push for a more modest counselor to student ratio. And I think there will be a need for more well-trained school counselors if that was going to happen. Are there policies or best practices that you know around the world on how best to achieve that laudable goal? I think it's a lovely goal, but schools counseling programs are diminishing around the country. So, and I wonder if there's a disconnect between this really good goal that we need to achieve and the reality that we have on ground in terms of how many schools, institutions actually offer our school counseling programs.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Shola. I don't know of any set of best practices is how we get to a point where people are responding or governments are responding. We can look at Korea, South Korea as a case in point. I mean, most families only have one child because it's so expensive there to prepare their child for school, for university. So as soon as you have a kid, it's all about providing the best education possible. And I've forgotten what it's called in Korea, but the after school programs that help you prepare for universities. And it's put enormous pressure and stress on young people. And I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but today, that is the #1 killer of teenagers in Korea is suicide. And, you know, guns aren't that easy to get a hold of there. So they have to be more creative about how to kill themselves. I mean, that's just the pragmatic thing of it all. So here's how this country responded. They just saw an emergency here. They're losing their young people. And they have been instituting in a forthright manner school counseling all over Korea. I think a similar phenomena is happening in the United States in the sense that these places that would never mention the 2 words school counseling, the U.S. Department of Education, for example, or the U.S. Surgeon General's office, for those 2 agencies, the Superintendent of Public Instruction and the U.S. Surgeon General to come out with such and if you read the documents, it's so emphatic about the role and the importance of school counselors and that we need more of them. You know, hopefully that's the kind of thing that would spur the federal government on and states to make these kinds of investments in schools. And I think that's probably the best strategy possible. This thing is so wide open for us, and I find it so interesting. One of the things we want to do with the policy briefs is with countries that are interested and they're gaining some traction, we want to work with them, policymakers, policy researchers, maybe the school counseling faculty member that would be that represents that country, but to work with them to develop policy briefs that would be culturally, sociologically appropriate for these particular countries. And so you can see there's enough work here for the rest of my career, as well as the rest of a lot of people's careers. But I just find it interesting. And, personally, I enjoy going to other countries and navigating a culture that I've not been experienced with. And I just find that just invigorating, life-giving kind of thing. So then I then take my professional background and in some way kind of apply it in that direction. So it's, yeah, we'll just see. We'll see how far we can get. But I'm hopeful, and if we can travel better, I mean, that's a key thing, to be able to travel easier. We're trying to put together an international meeting at Christ University in January. We're hoping that it could be possible for people to travel there. And they've got a wonderful setup for international meetings at the university. And if we're able to do it, maybe there's another step forward. We're planning on the meeting deals with psychotherapy, counseling, and well-being, and school counseling is a piece of this. And the ISPRESC group will be there in earnest, hopefully. And Tony Sam George, who's my collaborator and friend from Christ University, will have people from the government of India there. So here's another way that we're going to try to do this. But it's a slog, I admit it, but I don't think of it in those terms. If I step back and think about it, I think of it in those ways. But the fact that I'm just in the midst of it is, it's just life-giving, and shows met a number of the people through Zoom anyway. And, I see these people in person, whether it's in Italy or Nigeria. I haven't been to Nigeria, but might here. Certainly India, China, Korea. So it's just wonderful work. And it's nice to be with other people who want to make things better than they are. And we're all just kind of doing it together. It's just fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Sarah.
Thank you, AG. So Mike, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your presentation. It was just really fun and interesting to hear more about the research side of the work that you do. And I think it's really important work. It's just mind-boggling to me that to talk about school counseling is just so sort of, I don't know if radical is the right word, or, but I think it's kind of, this ties into, I really appreciate how you were saying there are some openings now, it's sort of like maybe another silver lining of the pandemic. But I was going to ask you if there are countries that have models in place that you know about through your research or your travels, where I guess where school counseling is more prevalent in education.
Well, I would say that the United States probably is the number one place that people point to. And that's why I say how it goes in the US is a reasonable, not a complete, but a reasonable predictor of how to go elsewhere. But certainly Korea, South Korea is one of those places. I think there are several countries in Europe that have well-established school counseling programs. I don't know a lot of detail about those. I mean, I'll have to say a lot of our work is with developing countries. And these are, this is why I'm more familiar with those countries than I would be with European models. I did have a little bit of a foray into Europe recently, in the sense that I was a keynote presenter for the Bulgarian Comparative Education Society annual meeting. And the comparison was all about school counseling. So there were countries there, European countries, particularly Eastern Europe. Slovenia was represented, and obviously Bulgaria. The UK was present. I'm trying to think of who else, but nevertheless, these are, I want to follow up with people to see what kind of connections we might be able to make there. So there could be, I mean, clearly the US has not cornered the market on how best to deploy or think about school counseling. If anything, people ought to learn what not to do by reading the literature about school counseling in the US. But maybe there'll be other places there. And I see, oh, Chloe, yeah, Chloe was a student of mine there, program. So I hope I can make it to Guam someday too. That's great. I would have to say on a side, I mean, this is just the damnedest thing. You just never know what's going to happen. My connection to school counseling, and Chloe taught in schools in Guam, so she could help me navigate through the system there. The fact that this thing is housed in Verona, Italy, is fairly remarkable for me, because you know, I have Italian on both sides of my family, and they're scattered all through the north. But my name is a Venetian name, and my grandfather's family is in the Veneto region, where the University of Verona is. So this puts me 2 hours from where he was born, and I have relatives that I can easily see, and I've been able to do that with this kind of work. And you know, Jay Carey, my colleague, and I apologize if I told this to some of you before, but I told him this is either, you know, just a random event, a curious thing, or there's something, you know, grander going on here. And his response to me is, and you know, he's 70 years old now. His response to me is, there are no random events. And I think he might be right there. So I've had this kind of personal thing going on as well. So it's what I'm going to do for, I can't see not doing it until I can't do anything. So, yeah.
We have another question here, Mike, from Stephen. Stephen, go ahead.
All right. Thank you so much, Mike. That was an interesting talk. I am just, I'm interested in.
Sorry, we can't hear you well, Stephen.
Okay. Can you hear me better now?
Yes.
All right. I said that was an interesting talk, and I enjoyed every bit of it. I'm interested in counseling because my wife also is interested in counseling. And I remember speaking with the assistant superintendent of Grandview District, and was telling me about how counseling is needed at this time, especially this post-pandemic period, and was giving a sample of what happened after the students were told to put off their mask, that they can now stop wearing masks. And some female students, they refused to remove their mask because they felt some kind of, they had some kind of fear of how they look like, and that they don't look beautiful anymore because they have been used to wearing masks, and all sorts of things. I see a need for be responsive and preventive counseling. So my question is that you mentioned during your talk that there is usually there is a 1 to 250 ratio, student to counselor ratio. I'm wondering, is that not too overwhelming for a school counselor? And what would be the best ratio that would be like a student to counselor ratio in the United States, as an example and a model for other developing countries?
Yeah, Stephen, thank you for the question here. I don't know the inner workings of that. That's a recommendation that comes from the American School Counselor Association. So you've got all kinds of professionals, researchers and the like, who recommend that number. How they came up with 250, I don't know. But in the United States, we're nowhere near 250. As I mentioned, I think the number is 424, and a lot of places a lot higher than that. Now, the interesting thing, and I mentioned about the policy briefs and the like, I mean, maybe 250 is not the right number within the context of another country. Maybe it's a different number, and this would play out. This would be fleshed out with policy research work in another country, and then we would embody this within the context of a policy brief for that country. But that's where I'm finding the work. This is part of the angle where the work is so interesting. This still allows me to do research-oriented work, developing a research plan. You got some questions, you collect data and all that. It's just in the context of another country where we are publishing. I published in the Italian literature, published in, or will in the Indian literature, certainly the Korean literature. And this is just a great thing. But in other countries, maybe the number's different. So hope that answers it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, thank you so very much, Dean Trevisan. What a great way. Yeah, shall we do that? Thank you so very much. What a great way to end our research conversations this academic year. Thank you to Dean Trevisan. Thank you to all of you for showing up. Meetings after meetings, research conversations after research conversations to sort of promote intellectual discussions and engagements. Sometimes we often disagree, but that's the beauty of such an environment or space in which we are. We've always found ways to come together and take our work to the next level. Thank you for showing up all through this year. Thank you to every one of you. But before you go, I want to say a big thank you to A.J. Rod and Laura Girardot for working with me to put together these research conversations. Thank you so very much. By the way, we will still have one more event. It's going to be a public lecture to be given by the Associate Vice President for Research at the University of Oregon, Dr. Emily Tanner Smith. That lecture will be sponsored and hosted by the College of Education on Monday, May 2nd at 10 a.m. Watch out for an announcement about that lecture. Once again, thank you for being here today and have a great week. Thank you to Dean Trevisan again. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, all right.